Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Activating Gen Z in 2024. For those of you just tuning in, my name is Jasmine Enberg. I'm a principal analyst at Insider Intelligence based in LA. I hope you enjoyed the keynote and the fireside chat just moments ago. And now I'm so excited to introduce three brilliant Gen Z experts. We have Ziad Ahmed, founder and CEO of Juve Consulting, Michelle Peterson, CMO of Kendra Scott, and Angelique Vendette, the CEO and founder of AVE Advisory. Before we begin, let us know where you're tuning in from, and I'd like for you in the audience to weigh in on something in the chat. How many Gen Zers do you interact with daily? You can do that by using the chat window to the right of the video feed. And most importantly, ask us questions. We'll get to as many as we can later on. But with that, let's get started. So Gen Z is an incredibly important, but can be hard to reach audience for many marketers. And as they grow up and their purchasing power expands, they're also redefining not only how we connect with each other and with the world, but also how we interact with brands. So we've outlined three themes that we believe will be important for activating Gen Z in 2024. The first theme is community. Community has become somewhat of a buzzword for marketers, but it is actually really important to Gen Z. How can marketers leverage it to engage Gen Z audiences?
Community is the basis of just connecting with audiences. And especially for Gen Z, it's all about being able to co-create and to be able to be on that journey with a brand together. If you're truly going to be engaged, if you're truly going to build, you know, um, a larger group and a larger sentiment towards what you're selling, towards the brand, whatever that may be, it all stems in community and being able to have that one-to-one relationship, which feels much more than just transactional on the sales level.
We've found that while community is a buzzword, it means different things for different segments of Gen Z. It really is not a word that applies similarly to the whole generation. So when we talk to consumers in focus groups who are in high school, they're looking to sort of find their tribe and fit in with their community. So when we're selling them jewelry, they all want to come and make the same and sort of all connect. When we look at the post-college Gen Z group, they're looking to sort of shed some of that and like redefine who they are and maybe redefine their uniqueness. So the way they then interact with our marketing and our category is a little bit more personal, and they want to have something that's unique and specific to them. So even as you think about how they navigate and connect with their community, it's different across different groups.
Ziad, you're back.
I am back. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'd love to know if you agree with that, or what is your perspective as a member of Gen Z on community?
What I think about in terms of community is I think 15 years ago, business pivoted to a consumer-first mindset, right, empowered by big data. And around 5 to 10 years ago, a creator-first mindset, empowered by this idea that perhaps you could have better access to audience through partnering with creators. And I think this one is all about community-first business. And I think especially coming out of this pandemic that fundamentally transformed the way that so many of us are interacting with each other. I think people are lonelier than ever before, right? And what so many of us are searching for is belonging, is permission to feel like we can be more of ourselves, right? And permission to feel like we can be more unapologetic in who we are, right? And I think that where a lot of brands are winning is when you think beyond just a brand to consumer relationship and think instead about how can you create relationships between your consumers, right? Like we are all more likely to stay at our jobs if we like the people that we sit next to at work. I think that a consumer is more likely to like a brand if they met their best friends with that brand, right? If there was meaningful points of connection and community that made you feel like you belonged, like that it was worth it, that you made a friend, that you shared a value, right? And when we think about this generation that is obsessed with value, both in terms of accessibility and affordability, but also in terms of values, insofar as buying from and purchasing from brands that are consistent with the ways in which we want to show up in the world, I think community is more important than ever before, right? And I think that the brands that are really winning are ones that understand that. And it's a lot harder, right? And I think historically, the way that the ecosystem has worked is it was, commerce first, then content, then community. It really has to be the reverse, right? You need to build the community, and that community is going to make content with each other because they are friends, they love their shared values, and then that's going to push commerce, because when people are in community and have needs and you're solving problems together, they're going to solve for their needs, and that requires some level of purchasing to back into, right? And I think of this notion of co-creation is so central to what Gen Z is asking for, We're saying that we don't just want to be talked about or talked down to. We want to be built with, right? We want to co-create the very things that are meant to serve us. And I think that makes everyone better off, right? Because I think diverse young people are the closest to culture and are the stewards of both our present and our future. And when we co-create with diverse young people to serve diverse young people, I think the net impact is through the roof.
Yeah, and I think that is such a perfect jumping off point for so many of the things that we're going to discuss today from co-creation. But first, I really wanted to talk about, this idea of community building, Ziad, that you brought up. And Angelique, until recently, you led marketing at Alo Yoga, which is known for taking innovative approaches to building communities, from the Pro program and Alo House to initiatives like Alo Gives. So how successful have those programs been, both from, a sales perspective and a community building perspective? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's, at Alo, community, co-creation, they were literally one of the pillars in everything that we did. So it stemmed from our community, even before we launched product, or even before we went about with an activation, IRL, like an Aloe House or showing up at Fashion Week, or you name it. We would tap into our community. We would tap into our advocates. We had about 4,000 yogis worldwide, who would be on telegrams with, and we'd be showing product, and we'd be talking about the activations, and we would want to, hear their feedback before it went out to the larger market. And so that community is such an important part of everything that we did at Alo. And similarly, even back to the experiential events, they were not transactional. They were not sales events. They were not like shop and shop, come and do yoga and then buy products. Quite literally, you could not buy any products at any of our experiences, like our Aloe houses. They were to give back to the community so you can really feel and breathe the values that Aloe had, and that you'd be able to say, okay, I did yoga, I did breath work, maybe I did Reiki or an IV drip, and I'm able to know what Aloe stands for. I'm able to understand that role within wellness. And that's because, again, these were not transactional. These were places where our community would come in and offer classes, or come in and offer, a wonderful healing breathwork session. And it was back to what Ziad was saying again on co-creation. It was brought to life together, for the larger community of folks that could come in, but at the same time, we were activating our existing kind of like tight-knit community, to just really personify the brand in a way that felt really unique and special. And then lastly, even on the digital front, when we think of community IRL and in person, and being able to touch and feel and live the brand, that's really special. But how do you replicate that online? And we've also really led into really great technologies so that the experience feels much more immersive. And again, it's not just, this transactional website that you're coming on to shop, but instead, we had these wonderful experiences where it's like VR and it's immersive, and you can take a class, whether that's like a stretch and yin class or whatnot, and you can flip through clothing, and then you could go learn about the clean and green skincare. So once again, leveraging technology to, again, kind of further the consumer journey and further that touch point into community and experience, which is really, really important. It's like I said earlier, it's just not a two-way street anymore. It's not transactional where brands and companies are distributing something top down. We need to flip that pyramid upside down, where we're in it together and both sides have something to come back with, to truly make it special and meaningful, especially with Gen Z.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought in this idea of, these experiences, IRL, because we talk so much about Gen Z being the most digital generation, and they certainly are. But, thinking back to what you said and what Ziad said, and Michelle, what you were talking about, people really do crave these in-person connections and experiences as well. And it's the combination of technology and digital as well as in-person that seems to be really resonating. And of course, all of this boils down to creating a personal connection, right, with the brand. And that's incredibly important to Gen Z. So at Kendra Scott, Michelle, how are you building, these personal connections with Gen Z, and how do you retain that sense of connection while you're scaling your marketing efforts, whether it's online or IRL?
It's great to hear this conversation because this has always been in the DNA of our company. So when Kendra started the company over 20 years ago, one of her pillars was connection before transaction. And that's how she got consumers to even learn about the business. She was, gifting product. She was donating to different organizations. When people came in the store, her objective was to connect with them. And she thought, I don't need to get the transaction. If I don't get it then, they'll tell a friend. If they don't tell a friend, like, they'll come back. As long as I connect, that is the number one objective. So we think that applies for all consumers, of course, in addition to Gen Z. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we've always started our marketing to be about in real life experiences. And then we always scale them from there. And frankly, it's not the most efficient way to market. It's more efficient to get a TV ad and be super broad, but that just isn't authentic to our brand. So we just recently had a campaign with our Gen Z audience, and it was created by our Gen Z marketers and social team as well, because we believe that's also important to have a super authentic voice. And we created, again, an in real life moment that was called our Hey Elisa tour. We went to over 10 colleges. We started with 3, and consumers asked us to come to more and more. So we went to over 10 colleges, and we had this super fun, immersive experience. They could take a survey. They could understand what Elisa was right for their personality. They got a custom coffee that also fit with the survey, and they could do it as a group. The idea of, bringing their friends and connecting with their friends. And again, our goal was connection. We saw a 30% increase in the product that we talked about in terms of sales over the next couple of weeks. So the transaction happened, but that wasn't the objective of the tour, and that wasn't the objective of the idea.
So building more on this idea of connection, I think it translates nicely into the next topic that we want to talk a little bit about, which is authenticity. And, one of the things that I hear brands struggle with a lot is, speaking to Gen Z in their own language. And part of that is making sure that you're culturally relevant. Gen Z is, again, very much online, very much, inspired and watching micro trends, et cetera. How would you describe the best way to know, what trends you should be participating in? And how can you do that in a way that doesn't come off as trying too hard and still remaining true to you as a brand? And that's for both of you.
I can jump in.
Sure.
I think for us, I touched on a little bit of the magic, which is that we create a lot of our Gen Z campaigns with our Gen Z team. And they really are the experts and almost the decision makers on those things, because they have a much better sense of how to speak to Gen Z. I actually saw the creative for our Hey Elisa campaign that we did a couple months ago. And the first thing I said was, I totally don't get this, but you guys love it, so we should do it. And the Gen Z group loved it. They wanted plush toys of the Elisa. They wanted keychains and stickers, and
wow.
They absolutely loved it. We also do that with our social team. Our social team engaged in Bama Rush maybe 2 years ago. And the way they got on that trend was they obviously are very immersed in culture. And they have a very clear sense of what our brand stands for. We're all very clear on the purpose about doing good in the world. We're all very clear on our pillars about fashion, philanthropy, and family. And within that, they have the empowerment to act and move and create content and respond and, do what they think is right for the brand within those pillars. So that helps that helps us be agile, but that also helps us be authentic and speak in a voice that's relevant to that group. And I think that's been really successful for us.
Yeah, I can chime in really quickly.
Sure.
From I guess from a marketing perspective, I'm a huge, huge believer in building a brand first company. And within building a brand first company, I'm also a huge believer in building a social first brand. So you're effectively building a social first company. And um, in terms of kind of, identifying those trends and being part of that culture, if you're not leveraging and working with folks that are day in and day out on those platforms or day in and day out actually that community themselves, then you're missing the boat. You really need to make sure that folks that are, speaking on your behalf and creating on your behalf, whether that's internal or external, like UGC, that are representative and that feel and breathe, the culture and the trends in real time. It isn't good enough for companies anymore as like forget everything that's not brand led, right? When you think of like um, pay to play tactics that are like very growth heavy and whatnot, you're not building community, you're not building connection that way. It's like a quick dopamine hit that you're paying for, and then sales comes again, and then you're wondering why you haven't, why there isn't sustained momentum. But then there's a sale moment, and you're relying on that again. So let's park that piece. But if you truly are investing in brand and community and really being part of the social zeitgeist and cultural zeitgeist overall, um, you need to ensure that at the core of it, you truly are leaning in to what is relevant today and it's in real time. Done are the days of these highly, highly polished campaigns. Gone are the days of planning your marketing calendar 12, 9, 6, even 3 months out. That just doesn't cut it anymore. If something is trending and it's hyper relevant, then we need to go to market in a way that speaks to that audience now, because what was cool 3 months ago is, like, not even, top of mind, not even close to it. What's cool 3 days ago might not be top of mind anymore for consumers too, and especially Gen Z, when you think of platforms where you're consistently served with content. Yeah, some trends are pervasive, but also the new thing might drop, and then whatever you may have planned, if it was too far out, is old news. So being again based in creating a social first brand is just really, really important, especially in connecting with Gen Z so that it's time relevant and authentic.
It creates, I totally agree. And I think you articulated well, like the brand challenge. It creates a great challenge for a marketer. The way you lead a brand, you have to be very comfortable being in the moment, being agile, making very quick decisions so you can be part of culture. And yet you do have to plan ahead, and you do have to think about, here's my brand purpose and the big ideas I want to deliver on over the next 18 months. And you have to lead a team who's able to respond and deliver something right away. We work with a lot of cross-functional teams who plan 18 months out, and that's the way they manage. Or our operations team who, manages in the moment if there's a quality issue. And I think as a brand builder, you have to be able to stretch your skills across both of those things and feel very comfortable in the day-to-day ambiguity and in the long-term strategic thinking and planning.
I love that. And I think that's so true and is going to resonate to a lot of marketers who are struggling with that right now. But Ziad, I wanted to bring you back into the conversation because so we're talking about authenticity and transparency. And when we were prepping for this panel, you said that Gen Z has an excellent BS radar. So what happens when Gen Z spots BS, and how can a brand come back from that?
In terms of this BS filter, I mean, I think that, look, we're growing up in a world that we've been so oversaturated with content since we were kids, right? And oversaturated with choice in regards to where we can show up and what we can consume. And so there's a pseudoscience statistic that's often quoted of our attention span is 8 seconds or 1.3 seconds now with the advent of, short form video content. And that's not entirely accurate, right? Because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that Gen Z Netflix binge watches for hours and hours and hours, perhaps not right now, strike, is happening and whatnot. But, disproportionately in the world, Gen Z is consuming both long form and short form content, right, seamlessly, right, interweaving the two together. And so it's not the case that we're only capable of paying attention for a short amount of time. It is the case that in an ecosystem with so much choice, it would be reckless to give somebody more than a second to earn our attention, right? There's just too much choice out there. And so we have to be quite judicious, right? With how we spend our time and where we allocate our energy to literally function as human beings, right? Because we are overwhelmed and oversaturated and overstimulated all the time. And so when we think about this bullshit filter, what that is to say is that when we're choosing between so much content, we become very good at identifying patterns of just being like, it's not even worth paying attention to that, right? Whether that is a little ad symbol and you're like, this is sponsored by Good Night, or whether it's this is chuggy, this is cringy, this was forced, this was try hard, this wasn't written, this wasn't produced, to Angelique's point, in a way that looks like how me and my friends would produce content or speak to each other, right? And it feels like I'm being pandered to rather than talked to, right? Rather than talked with, right? And so I think that a lot of us are increasingly skeptical of advertising ecosystems that very clearly are trying to get our attention, but most often feel like it's forced because it is forced, right? When you have a room full of people who look nothing like the communities that you're trying to serve or understand, make decisions about those communities, it's going to feel forced because it is forced, right? And I think many of us feel that way. It feels like a bunch of folks who are not our generation decided what they thought was cool, right? And put something out that they thought was cool that really isn't. Right. And so it's easy for us to scroll right past that because we see through it, because we have so much standard of comparison, because we see so much content and we know what it looks like when someone gets it right. Right. And so I think that that means we all have to hold ourselves to a higher standard, right, of being honest and candid. And I think that, like, when we think about what content does resonate with Gen Z, I talk about often, I think millennials grew up in an era of aspirational excellence, right? Not every millennial is Angelique with a perfect
Millennial
Instagram.
pink
Yes,
is the
yes,
perfect
but not,
example of that.
yeah, but not every millennial is a perfect Instagram feed like Angelique, right? Like most millennials, right? Like don't necessarily care as much about their Instagram aesthetic, but follow influencers who have that perfect Instagram aesthetic,
Yes.
the perfect picture for your family, right? That perfect aesthetic. And Gen Z is the opposite. We might edit our picture 7 times, pre-photo dump era, right? We might test our captions with 9 friends, but we follow influencers who are so brave they don't give a damn. They post what they want, when they want, right? And the same is true with brands. The brands that we're increasingly having affinity for are ones that don't act like a commercial, but act like a person. We know who's behind it. We know the founder story. They're showing us real things. They're being honest when they mess up, right? They're being candid, right? They're not giving us a PR statement.
Yeah, and I think to your point, though, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm a millennial. I grew up in this millennial pink, picture perfect Instagram influencer world. But even, among our generation, I think that is starting to shift.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, you're seeing people, older as well, start to lean into this more real, raw, authentic content. And I think that has a lot to do with Gen Z's influence on the way that we use social and digital. But
that's right.
We got a really great question from somebody in the audience that I think speaks perfectly to this, because they ask, how do you help a brand that is not focused on Gen Z or younger understand that they are the future, and that if we don't start now, the brand will die out? And that's for all of you.
Yeah, I can chime in first because just very, very succinctly, it's all of culture is changing. This panel could be activating culture, activating consumers in 2024, and what are the trends? It's not just about one demographic or one age group. That is the whole culture that is changing, that is about the authenticity, and that is about just being real and removing that highly filtered look and removing the polish and the planning and the thing that just is like fabricated. We want to see what's raw, what's real. And yes, Gen Z has certainly helped guide media in that direction and conversation in that direction, whether it's like a personal text, I'm texting Ziad and it's just real and raw, or whether I'm sharing that on my socials. But that's the same thing for brands and what we expect from brands. So to your question, if you're not targeting Gen Z, that's okay. That's still the way in which media, in which social, in which communication is shifting. And that's why you see these amazing social platforms that are popping up, like Discords, or even like the Robloxes of the world, where you're connecting in different ways, but it's not all about the highly polished image. It's just like real, raw, you want to get to it. And I think as brand marketers and as leaders within, the larger ecosphere of running companies and marketing, we need to be cognizant of that, or else we're going to miss the boat. And if you're still doing highly polished content that's, very editorialized, very photoshopped, very curated, you name it, it just won't be relevant anymore. And that's the biggest miss that brands and companies can walk into.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we're seeing some of this more real, raw, authentic TikTok-like content even translating onto TVs, which of course, that generally doesn't have a target audience of Gen Zers. It's older generation. So you're right. I mean, it really has shifted across generations. But Michelle, staying on this idea of being real and raw and authentic, how do you balance giving your creator or other partners power to tell their stories while still remaining true to the Kendra Scott brand?
It's a great point because while this applies to Gen Z, and while there's, again, like I said in the beginning, nuances there's segments within the segment of Gen Z. So there's tons of nuances. While that's true, this is also a consumer dynamic that they're looking for co-creation and they're looking for authenticity, and that they're looking to tell their story about a brand. We, again, from the very beginning, Kendra did this, but we're a very philanthropic brand. We've donated $60 million to our communities over the last 10 years. And that isn't done from a brand point of view. Our philanthropic effort is that we allow our consumers to fundraise for the organizations that they want. So it might be a mom and her local PTA. My daughter, who's in high school, has cerebral palsy and she wants to raise money for that. And all of those consumers can do events in our store where they can raise a portion of the proceeds of that event for the organization that's important to them. And we do 22,000 of these events a year that are co-created and in partnership with our consumers to donate this money to an organization that's important to them. And I think, again, speaking of consumers, all our consumers do that. And certainly it's become more and more important to Gen Z. They want to give back, but they don't want to give back to who the brand wants to give back to. They want to give back to what's important to them. And we've found that most consumers want that as well.
Absolutely. And we got another really good question from the audience. And I think, Ziad, this one might be really great for you to take because it's about the dichotomy between Gen Z saying that sustainability is important, but also wanting to be on trend at the same time. So how can marketers, really grapple with being in the moment and capitalizing on those trends, with also understanding that there's a very real environmental impact of doing that?
Yeah. So a few things to say. Like one, I think that what Gen Z is looking for, I was saying earlier, right, is this aspiration unapologeticness, right? And I think what a lot of brands do wrong is not being honest about where they are, right? And so I think a lot of brands are scared to talk about their supply chain, to talk about what goes into being on trend, what goes into not being on trend, right? And we're rarely seeing folks pull back the curtain, right? I talk to a lot of the brands that we work with, and we work with a lot of the biggest Fortune 500s, right, Gen Z facing companies, right, to help them resonate more with Gen Z in the work that I do. And what I often say is like, why are you paying so much money to influencers? And I'm glad you do because that spend might be going through me. But why are you not putting your CMO as the spokesperson for the organization? Like, why don't I see them on TikTok, right? I want to see them, or the CEO, I want to see them talking. I want to know why you're making the decisions that you are, because I think that Gen Z does not always have the full information about what goes into the decisions that are made at companies. And I think by having a conversation with each other, right, by saying, hey, look, this is what we want, this is what we can do, where can we meet in the middle, right, that actually gets us towards better, more sustainable, right, more ethical business practices is a really productive competition that needs to be happening more openly, right? Because right now I think it's happening in such a siloed format that isn't actually serving folks. Right? When we think about where the economy is headed, right, and when we think about staying on trend, there's a lot of fear of alienating your core consumer, right, and like leaning too hard into Gen Z. But what we know to be true is that Gen Z is less important. What's more important is middle school girls, right? Middle school girls set the trends of every generation, right? They knew Musically and Justin Bieber were hot long before the rest of us did, right? And so marketing is always about following the leader, right? And following cultural trendsetters, which are disproportionately, communities of color, queer communities, youth, young people, and understanding not just following their culture, but employing those people, compensating those people for their cultural production, right? Putting those people on your cap table, putting those people in senior leadership positions in your company. And the way that connects to sustainability is when you have those communities represented, right, who are disproportionately facing the adverse effects of climate change, they're going to make just different decisions when they're in power.
right? And they're going to better align your business practice with sustainable practices, with culture, because why it's so hard often to jump on trend and for that to feel at odds with sustainable business practices is because you're so far away from trend, right? Whereas if your team, if your leadership is a lot closer to trend, you might be able to see it 6 months in advance. You might be able to actually know where culture's headed a little bit more, and you might have some more playing time. But when you're always playing catch up, right? Because you're making assumptions about a community instead of actually building community, employing that community, it's going to be a lot harder to crack that code. But I also think it's important to say that I don't think a brand should or can stay on top of every trend or participate in every trend, right? I think that's both bad marketing as well as unsustainable practices. I think it's really important to know who you are as a brand, what you stand for, how you want to show up, and to be really consistent and honest about that, both internally and externally.
I think
So, go ahead. Yeah.
I think it's the brand builder's job, though, to be able to say, if Gen Z is looking for sustainability in a way that's on trend, there are ways to deliver that.
Yeah, that's right.
The secondhand marketplaces that lots of brands have launched, but is a bit scary because it could steal from your current brand. It could not be incremental. Right. That is a perfect way where they're looking to do that, and that also helps waste and that helps sustainability. So I don't think we can let ourselves off the hook that those two things are at odds, because they don't need to be, and we have the challenge to do that, to be on trend and to fulfill giving back and being good to the planet. And
I think that's exactly right. Like we worked with Coach, right, to launch their first startup in 80 years called Coachtopia, right, which is right. Right, and we built a community. We built a community of Gen Zers for them, right, and we co-created this brand. We're in tandem with climate conscious, fashion forward Gen Zers, which is the first circular economy brand of its kind. Right, where they're taking the waste from existing Coach plants and refashioning it towards super cute, right, really wonderful products that are mostly really custom made, that Gen Z is obsessed with and selling out and buying out in masses, that are also reducing the carbon footprint of Coach in mass and creating a really customizable, right, climate conscious ecosystem that is on trend, that is cute, and they're building a whole supply chain model that allows them to repurpose all of their waste to create more bespoke products that ultimately resonate with trend and that are built in collaboration with diverse young people, and it's selling and it's working. And so I think that's exactly the right sentiment, that through leaning into circularity, through leaning into co-creation, through reimagining what waste, right, and what supply chain look like, I think it is possible to do both. But that was 2.5 years in the making, right, and a lot of really smart people on the community side, on the supply chain side, on the product side, on the marketing side, making this a priority, right? It's not easy, but it's possible, and I think that is absolutely the role that we have to play, right, in reimagining the marketplace towards getting us to more outcomes like that, because there's a lot that we can learn from those examples.
Yeah.
I think that's so right. And I love the way that you were both able to sort of reframe this dichotomy, right? And say that these things don't have to be mutually exclusive. And there are ways to be able to tap into both things that are important to Gen Z, trends and sustainability. But I wanted to throw it to you, Angelique, because you and I have talked a lot about authenticity and what that means, not only to Gen Z, but overall. And when we were chatting earlier about it, you said something so powerful, which was that 2024 was going to be a time of reckoning for a lot of brands. So what did you mean by that?
Yeah, you know what? I am so tired of the word authenticity being used left and right and center and like slapped in the purpose of briefs, of campaigns. I just don't think authenticity is enough anymore. It's not about authenticity. That is table stakes. That ship has sailed. We are authentic in everything we do. That can't be like the thing you're leaning on. We now also have to be transparent. So it's the authenticity. Again, that's not enough. It's transparency. And back to what Ziad was saying about supply chain, back about what Michelle was saying about how the community is leaning in, and you can still be trend focused and you can still, have both live in parallel. That's all about being transparent. If you can't reach certain goals, we're not publishing them anymore, right? I love that the EU has just like banned greenwashing terms. I think it was, the week before last. And when you think of everything that companies have relied upon in the last 10 years, there was a lot of like fluff in the marketing world. A lot of like, oh, we're diverse, we lean into DEI, let's slap this on for pride. Oh, cool, we do this and that. We have like a small campaign, and this is the one time we use a model that looks like XYZ. That just isn't enough. And if you're transparent and if you're transparent about your goals and where you're heading, you can sell fast fashion and you can lean into, okay, there's, some of this was lab made, but some of the skincare is plant-based, and just be very clear as to why that's the case and why there might be benefits on both sides. Let's say you are, and I don't mean to drive this back to the question on fast fashion, but wanted to also chime in. If you are clear on what you're doing and the steps that you're taking, you can just be so transparent and be like, hey, our turnaround time is 15 days. And in order to do that, we do X, Y, and Z. But here's the one initiative that we're doing that's reducing water waste. Or here is the one collection that we're leaning into that is, X percentage in waste reduction than the rest. It's just about that clarity and not pretending that sustainability doesn't exist. We're not pretending that we're leaning into something. We're really at the core and center of who we are, isn't true. I love this notion of having spokespeople. I love this notion of, get the CMO on, get the CEO on, but also have the employee force on. Have your in-store associates be the face and voice of your brand. Have your community that's really active on social. Bring them in to moderate for you. Doesn't have to be like this big corporate team in the back end that's, puppeting. Have everyone lean in for you. And that's where you have the transparency, where you're able to then get forgiveness if there are mistakes, or if you're like, oh, typo, okay, cool. It's like you're able to laugh about it with your community, and you're able to just bring this light that makes me as a consumer, feel like another level of connectedness that isn't transparently there. So very strong POV.
Yeah, no, and I think that's so right. I think it's about putting a face behind the brand, right? Companies are made up of people as well. And, people also make mistakes, and you can come back from that, but you do have to be not only authentic, because I love that you called it table stakes, because it truly is, but also transparent. And I could talk to all three of you about this for hours, but we are out of time. So Ziad, Michelle, Angelique, thank you again so much for sharing all of your insights and answering the questions from our audience. We appreciate it so much. And thank you also to our viewers for tuning in. Next up, we have another analyst-led panel, Retail Media in 2024 with Andrew Lipsman. You can join Andrew by clicking on the tab below the video that says Next Session. While you wait for Andrew's panel to begin, don't forget to check out our new networking feature through the navigation panel. You can take your photo and upload it to our gallery, and then you get to see other attendees, analysts, and presenters. Thank you again so much.